rear brake pads on it. And the first thing we'd like to do is make sure that we're safety minded. We're going to chalk one of the front wheels so we're in compliance with our safety. And then we just want to get some basic tools. A breaker bar doesn't have to be this big, or a 4-way lug wrench. I don't like the regular one-handed lug wrenches because they're just hard to use. 13/16 socket with a little extension so we can stay away from the body, and just turn them till they're all loose, one at a time. And then you can put a light-duty ratchet on it to break them loose, and always have it on the ground when you break them loose. It makes it a lot easier to keep the tire from the wheel from rolling if it's off the ground. And now you want to find a suitable jacking point and a jack stand point. You can jack from the lower arm and put a jack stand on the frame rail is what I usually try to do. And that's pretty much all there is to that. And now that we got the wheel off, we want to look at the brake lines, make sure there's no breakage or crackage at the brake line connections, the rubber hose connections on either end. And we want to look at the rotor. If the rotor is in shape like this, that's not in bad shape. It's recommended you have it resurfaced and deglazed, but I think this will be fine for the rear. And now we're ready to depress the piston inside the caliper. Most people don't have the proper tool it takes to do this, so there's a different way. We don't want to force fluid back up through the system, so you open the bleeder, and you may want to hang a rag over the bleeder to keep the fluid from spraying into the fender well. Always have a drip pan, and it's preferred to wear gloves too. This is a 5/16 or 8mm wrench that we're using, and we just want to rock it open easily, work it back and forth, and get it broken loose. Sometimes if the rubber cap's missing, you'll have a bunch of crap in there. Sometimes you'll have to deal with that. The next step is to take a small common screwdriver, flat tip screwdriver, and go between the pad and the caliper. And as you see, the fluid is coming out, the piston is being depressed inside the caliper. Slipped a little bit. And if you're careful, you can kind of do this pretty easily without making a big mess. And if you get behind this outer pad, you can depress this piston completely in its bore, and that allows you to put the new pads in without any problem. Once you've got the piston depressed, you want to go and take the cap off the master cylinder and let it gravity bleed. You can put your finger over it to let the air build up out of the caliper, and you'll see fluid bleeding and bubbling when air hits it. Close the bleeder, and you don't have to just yank down on it. And here we had more travel. We had to get the piston in more, so we went to the inner pad between the rotor and the inner pad. And since we're changing the pad, we're not damaging anything, but we need to get that piston all the way in, and then pull the thing out and let it bleed. And now we're going to loosen the anchor bolts for the caliper, slider anchor bolts. I like to loosen up. Sometimes having an articulating head wrench helps, a ratchet. Get them both loose. These are the anchor slider bolts. And it's very important to inspect these for wear and lube. They need to have lube on them. And sometimes they have different parts to them. And you want to put them where you know it's going to go to the top one. That's where that clip went. This one doesn't have one, so it goes to the bottom. So you can keep them separated that way, and it helps. You can see the piston is totally depressed in. The seal is still in good shape. We're good there. And you want to support this caliper to where it's not hanging from the hose. Very important. Now here we're looking at the pads, and they have a lot of wear, not much left. And what I'm looking for is an even thickness between the two pads relative, and I'm looking for a flatness, not any taper or warped ends or worn ends on each end or top or bottom. That tells me there might be other problems. With this case, there's not. They're good even thickness, and they're flat. They're not warped or tapered. So we're real close to that wear index. That wear indicator was just about ready to start scraping the rotor. So thank you, Lord. And now we have a comparison to make sure we have the right pads. We want to look at our old one, look at our new one, make sure the length and the tabs are relative there. Of course, the thickness is way better. This is what we call anti-seize compound. It's for the sliding points for our anchor pins, slider anchor pins, and to lube where the pads actually slide on the metal pieces here up in the caliper anchor. And we're going to be replacing these metal pieces right here. They came with the pads. Sometimes they don't, so you got to take them out and wire wheel them, wire brush them, and then clean them. And here we are removing these metal slider pieces. It's what the pads slide on in the caliper anchor. Sometimes you have to use a screwdriver to get them out. It's not a problem. And what we've done here is we've isolated the rotor from where these clips are going to go, because we're going to coat these new clips with a little bit of anti-seize compound, and we want none of it having a chance to get it on the rotor. And now we're going to coat the new slider clips, just a light film coat of where the foot is going to go is what we want. And you want to wipe from the inside out. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a whole lot. The less, just a light film coat, the less the better. And you can see that you can get some on the rotor real easily by these ends here and off of your fingers. So that's why it's important to isolate this rotor. We just slide this piece in and pop it into place. And we've made sure we got the correct pad with the squealer indicator on the inside edge where the old one was. We pulled our paper out and we put our foot of this pad up in there and just slide it gently into place. And then we can take this paper out and put our other shoe into place. Now sometimes this is a little trickier because of this anchor. And it goes right in there just like that. Now I like to put a little bit on the bolt, a little lubrication on the bolts as well as in the bolt hole. So I'll put just a little push of this right in there like that, and the bolt will push it down into the bore. And then I've ensured that it's going to be completely lubed. And then I put the caliper back on. I want to make sure our hose is not all twisted. And we got to make sure that these are underneath that piece. And they just slide right on and go underneath these rubber pieces just like this. Just like so. I'm going to make sure our brake hose is not kinked. It's routed correctly. Then we can take our bolts, lightly coat them, and put them back in. I like putting the top one in first because it helps locate and it's easier to work with. You want to make sure that you get the right bolt in the right hole. And it's very important for the life of the caliper to have these bolts lubricated. And just tighten them down to the proper torque. Here we have our master cylinder reservoir and cap system. And as you can see, this one actually has really nice clean fluid in it compared to most. We want to keep this up to the full level as we're going to bleed the brakes. And the brake level is right about here, the full mark. So if the more full we keep it, the easier it bleeds air out of the system. So try to keep, as you're bleeding, try to keep this reservoir full. You can always bleed more out if you have to. And now that we have our anchor bolts back into the anchor plate and caliper anchored up, we're going to go ahead and re-bleed with the master cylinder cap off and the reservoir full. We're going to re-bleed this to make sure, there's already some air in there. You want to put the cap back on the bleeder, and I do like to take, just because sometimes custom wheels get really dirty, I like to spray a little brake cleaner on the caliper where the brake fluid drips and wipe it dry, or blow it dry with compressed air. And it just makes a cleaner job, keeps wheels cleaner. Now when I'm bleeding, I like to put the cap on just loosely so it vents and keeps stuff from falling into the reservoir. Now we're done bleeding, we want to put the cap back on tight. We want to make sure we're up to fluid level, which is good. And then we want to slowly, with small, slow strokes of the brake pedal, depress the brake pedal until it's firm and you felt that it's not rising with each pedal pump. So go ahead and start pumping the brake pedal slowly, little strokes, and then kind of make a note of how far the pedal rises each one. Well, we still have a little air in our system, which sometimes happens, so we've loosened our cap. We've still got a lot of fluid in the reservoir, and we want to leave it cocked for ventilation, and we're going to re-bleed that rear wheel. And we had a little air from the start, and our pads are up against the rotors. Sometimes you have to put your finger over the bleeder to get the air to come up to the top. Wait a couple seconds and then the air will come through and you can see it dripping. I think we got it all out. And then we can close our bleeder, do an inspection of all our hoses and everything, make sure they're in the correct trajectory and not hitting and rubbing against anything. And this system's good to button up. We've done our inspection and our brake pedal check, and so we're ready to put this wheel and tire back on. I like to get down here like this to put the tire on. It's easier for me. I'm old and decrepit, so it's easier for me to lift it up onto the lug studs without doing damage to them and getting damage to the wheel. For installing the lug nuts, I like to start them by hand so they don't get cross-threaded. That happens a lot, especially when people are in a hurry and using power tools. I've been doing this a long time and have yet to cross-thread one because I take my time, enough time to do it right. You want to get these kind of lightly seated. That way when you put the tire and wheel on the ground, it's not damaging the wheel and they're ready to torque. And now we're taking it down off the jack stand and putting it on the ground. I want to make sure we've got everything cleared out of the way so you don't drop it onto the jack stand and doing any damage to your car. Nice and slow with your jack. We're torquing our lug nuts and we want to do it in a star pattern. We want to have the proper lug torque for the wheel. You can get that at the dealer or local car. Your auto parts store should be able to do that. And it's very important to do it on a star pattern so they're all even torqued. The even torque will keep the rotor from warping, first of all, and it just ensures the proper torque. Once we've torqued all the lug nuts, we want to take it out on a test drive and lightly do short brake light applications. Check for squealing or any noises or any funny feelings in your pedal, and enjoy.